Number 1, driver's licenses. I'd like to bring to attention how a practice in driver's license testing is aiding in discrimination in many ways. The issue I'm talking about is the requirement that the person testing needs to provide the car that they take the test in, a trend that existed long before the pandemic, for the record. Because one can't rent a car without already having a full license, this aspect of the test puts a financial history requirement on the person testing. It requires them to have a secondary person that has a car, and for that person to have a car that they can spare at the tester's convenience. This is an unnecessary barrier defined by the wealth gap that makes it much harder for people that are already starting out with less. This becomes a gateway for discrimination when you add on top of that the growing push for states to require ID to vote. Some states do not list non-driver IDs as valid sources of identity proof. Others needed to be forced to make temporary IDs more accessible just so people can somewhat have the ability to meet the requirements. A little food for thought. Number 2, trans and LGBTQIA+ rights. This country is experiencing a wave of hate taking over local governments currently directed at queer communities, with legislation preventing the discussion of these people in schools, banning books that touch on the topic, and overall using aggressively inappropriate terms a la grooming and sexually explicit to describe anything queer, with hopes of firing up the ignorant and making the indifferent too uncomfortable to disagree. But it also goes further to explicitly ban transitioning under the guise of preventing a permanent change in kids, though logically, hormone blockers is what actually would solve this issue. And since they've gone unbothered in these steps, they are confident enough to work on laws to prevent a transition in adults. There was this thing that I saw a rabbi say on the topic that really stuck with me. He said something along the lines of, "I'm a simple man. I just don't want kids to kill themselves." That is such a stark difference from the villainization people have for the concept of suicide, constantly deeming the severely depressed as weak or bound for hell. But here was this religious authority saying, hey, it's super easy to be loving and accepting of trans kids, and in return, they don't die. That's worth it. Because that's what this all boils down to. The science is out there, and it confirms that gender-affirming healthcare and expression is a tremendous help to the mental health of trans kids and adults. Putting barriers up to these things doesn't make them any less trans. It makes them feel as if there isn't a place for them in this world when there always has been and always will be. The fact that there are so many laws popping up around the country with the goal of exterminating queer people under the banner of baseless For the Kids campaigns is extremely disturbing. The fact that there's no practical way to prevent a state from making it legal to hunt down parents that move to another state to seek gender-affirming care for the kid, nor to stop a state from legalizing vehicular manslaughter directed at Black Lives Matter protests, is a screaming signal that the system is broken. With every passing day, it seems that the push for small government and state autonomy was just so it would be harder for anyone to interfere with sundown towns. Number 3, police. So many people have, rightfully, lost faith in the legal system as it stands. To constantly see Black folks cut down over nothing, and when people try to bring justice for these individuals, people in the system, like Daniel Cameron, take matters behind closed doors so they can lie about whose side they're on. Then even after what should be the most blatant miscarriage of justice is brought to daylight, there are zero consequences. At this point, it is hard to call it corruption because the United States police system was created to kidnap Black people and either put them in the ground or put them to labor. It really never mattered which. Social unrest is brewing, and for plenty of reasons, and a complete reshaping of the justice system is going to be necessary to make this country a fraction of the land of the free it wants to sing about. The current system of grand jury needs to go. Even one example of a DA lying about his intentions and what he has said in a trial is too many to trust that system to ever work justly. The police need to be abolished and replaced with strong foundational social systems. A country that spends more on its police than most countries spend on their militaries, but still has such a high violent death rate, triple the next highest advanced country, it doesn't work. How can New York require 3,000 officers stationed in subways at any given time, but be giving reports from the Brooklyn subway shooting that make it sound like the cops from The Simpsons were the ones on duty? The answer is that the police are not actually America's finest. Because if it tried, this country could do much greater by its people. Instead, the system is based on the white perception that the demonization, abuse, and impoverishment of people of color is what keeps them and their way of life safe. So the police don't actually have to care about justice or community. They don't have to have many skills. They said it themselves when complaining about body cams, that if they were to go to a family disturbance or see a struggling parent that can't afford a car seat, the system requires them to arrest rather than support. The system of policing that we have was not built for an equal world, and it's not welcome in one either. Number 4, COVID-19 policy. The current basis for COVID-19 policy is completely discriminatory against the disabled and lower class. It is the plainest form of discrimination to tell these communities, you cannot go outside with a reasonable expectation that you will survive. You cannot get groceries with the reasonable expectation that you will survive. You cannot go to work or ride on public transport with the reasonable expectation that you will survive. But if the government officials were at least saying that, it would be less predatory. Instead, what's being said is, we are lifting precautions because only the immunocompromised are dying. The government officials that are intended to represent and stand for us are saying, I, as someone with high income that can afford healthcare, can afford the copay and out-of-pocket fees on top of my healthcare, that could afford treatment in the worst-case scenario, could afford to take time off work if I need to be out sick, and have the space and means to isolate from more vulnerable members of my household if I test positive, I have nothing to worry about, because the system functions just enough to take care of me if I'm in need, and my donors of similar situations also have no need to fear. You are the ones dying, so I will not put myself or others that carry the same privileges I have in a position of minor discomfort or inconvenience, because your life is not worth that.